What is going on? Thank you for entering the chamber once again. Just as promised, today we're going to be talking about Eraserhead and how you can beat him at Nationals this year in 2023. Eraserhead is one of the most dominant strategies in the meta right now, and compared to all of the other characters you could be playing, he's by far the most control-focused character, so you should be ready for the style of gameplay that Eraserhead presents. Now, unique to Eraserhead, he actually can be played as both a control deck, which most people play him as, but he also has a nasty death combo variant that can kill you if you're not ready. I'm going to cover both of those today to help you maximize your chances of surviving. Let's get right into it, starting with Void Eraserhead. Let's start with how Eraserhead works, how he wants to kill you. Void Eraserhead plays a primarily punch-focused deck, playing around cards like Repeated Smash and Rejuvenating Smash. These are very high-quality attacks that draw him cards, can snap the momentum or burn that momentum. From there, he supplements these attacks with other punches like Hardened Jab or Hardened Chop to create an attack lineup that makes it so that way, he's basically always playing cards on a 4 or, easier. As long as he can keep checking those 5s or even checks a couple 3s, the cards will re-ready foundations through repeated, or they'll pick up face downs and then put new face downs in that are ready and not committed. So it's like effectively playing on a lower difficulty. So he can make these long attack strings once he has a stage that can support it. To help get him there, he plays a really comprehensive defensive suite that lets him block your attacks, counter your abilities. He can disrupt your turn. It's a very difficult deck to navigate. And once he's assembled this momentum and he's turned off all of your different defensive pieces, he tends to finish you out either with a repeated that he puts momentum behind, or some people will play Ultimate Quirk Combination, which is just a giant bomb that will, even if you're still at half health or better, if he has some momentum, it can kill you in one shot. So, how do you beat a character like Eraserhead? Well, first of all, even though he provides a lot of speed reduction on defense, he does only have 19 health, so applying a lot of pressure and getting through damage onto the character will add up quickly. And notably, this is a character that's very reliant on his stage for a lot of his extra speed reduction, card draw, or extra defensive attacks with things like Spooky or Unbreakable. So if you can apply that pressure early and get in hard, you can take Eraserhead up before he's properly set up. There are some other things you can do, though, to help improve your odds. The character is somewhat momentum dependent. Void doesn't have a lot of ways to pump damage, so it relies on getting in pokes with annoying cards like Plummeting Punch or Rewind Throttle as ways to make very fast attacks that you're kind of incentivized to not block, because they're very hard to block and they don't do a lot of damage. That's exactly what Eraserhead wants. By not blocking and eating these small pokes, he now gets momentum that he can then turn into more damage later. As a way to think about it, even if it's a repeated and not an ultimate quirk combination, even on repeated, every momentum is 3 damage. So whenever you see these tiny moves that are only for a few points, you should really think about them as doing about 3 more damage than they actually do. Unless, of course, you have a way to make him lose his momentum. The other thing is that because this is a punch-focused deck, it's very reliant on repeated and using repeateds in hands to ready a bunch of foundations. This is a bit harder to play around. There's not a lot of decks that can actually address this. But if you have cards that you can play that can counter enhances or take abilities away from cards or make them gain flash, etc., you can turn repeated into a very lackluster card. And those are some ways you can help defend yourself against a Void Eraserhead. Bottom line, as long as you keep the pressure up and don't give him too much free momentum, you're probably going to be okay. Now let's get into Death Eraserhead. Now this is a fun one. This is a aggro deck that has a combo kill, but it defends itself unreasonably well for an aggressive deck, and there's a lot to unpack here. Let's start with how this deck actually combo kills you, and it does that off the back of 3 cards: Brutal Strength, Grenadier Bracers, and Fierce Whirlwind. Brutal Strength lets you turn both your health and spare foundations into damage, so on its own you can often treat it as just +2 damage on every attack that Eraserhead throws, which pairs nicely with his +2 speed. You make a lot of your death attacks very threatening with just that combination alone. Grenadier Bracers pushes this to another level by giving you an extra damage whenever you blow up a foundation, making you have effectively +3 damage in total on all of your attacks. It also allows you to, once per turn, because it has a commit cost, put damage on a move equal to the number of foundations that you destroyed. So Bracers, in addition to pumping damage for the turn, can also put just one giant stack of damage on the last move if it's a move you think will hit. We then tie all of this together with Fierce Whirlwind. And the important thing about Whirlwind here is A, it has EX, so we have some momentum. We can use that to make it even faster. Now it's already going to be a 6 high in Eraserhead, which is fairly quick. But it also allows us to blow up our stage and ready foundations equal to the number of cards that we blow up. But in this case, when we play a Whirlwind, we're not interested in readying cards. We're just going to blow up our entire stage. and then commit Grenadier Bracers and get damage equal to the number of foundations we had at the beginning of the turn. This is often like not 8 or 9 damage once we're like properly set up. And then in conjunction with Brutal Strength and other numbers, this will end up as like a 6 high or possibly an 8 high for like 13, 15, just large values. And it's a huge bomb that comes at the end of the string. Now to actually get there to the end of the string, the rest of Eraserhead's attacks, at least on death, are a lot of very easy to play moves. They tend to be 4 difficulty moves or lower. In particular, he loves playing Binding Cloth Capture, as it's effectively a 3 difficulty attack that also gives you an extra seal. Obviously, he has access to Twisting Azure Inferno, which he can trigger pretty reliably since he can use the erase from his hand to seal a defensive piece and get some damage out of it, which then makes those Binding Cloth Captures easier to play. The last attacks are usually Vile Seizings or Instant Shining Flashes, because these are just very easy attacks to play, and Vile Seizing is just a very stat-efficient card that has a very scary effect on it, and then you put some stats on it to boost, and it's a nasty 1-2 punch. So you play this long string of very well-statted moves, thanks to the death stage. And then if your opponent is still alive, you can kill them with a Fierce Whirlwind. Defense is unreasonably well in this character. And that's because even though this is like an aggro deck, it still actually gets to play Eraserhead's defense. So he still has the character ceiling and he still has that speed reduction. So even though he's not playing a ton of defensive cards, it can actually be kind of hard to put damage on this character. So the trick to playing against Death Eraserhead is applying enough pressure to kill him in a timely manner, because if you don't, he's going to kill you without overextending and leaving yourself open to just dying to a random string of attacks. Even if they don't have the combo, a lot of the foundations and attacks in the Death Eraserhead lineup can get there, especially if you're also playing a 7-hander. So you really have to respect both its offense and its defense, and you need to find the exact tempo for your deck where you can apply enough pressure to keep them on their toes without overextending and getting yourself killed. And there's not going to be like a one-size-fits-all approach to that. You're going to have to experiment for yourself. Now there's one last thing I want to talk about with Eraserhead, and this comes up a lot as a talking point about the character, and it's his ability to turn off your character through erase. A lot of people, when they talk about Eraserhead, at least in my opinion, they tend to talk about it as if it doesn't matter, how many attacks you play or what your character is doing. You just have to play like you don't have a character because he's going to seal your character every time. That's not really how that actually works. It might feel that way because Eraserhead can discard a card to pick up an erase. But consider, if you will, if Eraserhead has, for example, 2 cards in his hand, right? It doesn't even matter what those cards are. He discards one of those cards to get an erase. So he now has one random card and an erase in his hand. If he blocks with that random card, he has just the erase left in his hand. If he uses that erase, he's out of cards. He doesn't have a card to discard to get it back. In other words, using the erase is still losing a card from his hand. So, just because an Eraserhead can blank your character, if your character has some kind of repeatable effect, the Eraserhead player only has a few cards and doesn't have access to a lot of card draw, he can't erase you every time. Yes, he can commit to draw 2 more cards, but that requires losing the speed reduction that he has, and he's not going to be able to turn those cards into more erases. So even if he does the draw 2, it's unlikely he can keep erasing you for long. The bottom line is that while you shouldn't expect to have your character on every attack that you play into Eraserhead, you actually will have them for quite a bit. Unless, of course, the Eraserhead player has like 5 or 6 cards or has a ton of card draw, some unusual situation. But if they've like played a couple of attacks and built a few cards and passed with like 2 or 3 cards, they just can't afford to erase you 3 or 4 times. It doesn't work that way. They don't have the cards to discard to do that. That's actually going to wrap up my outro for playing against Eraserhead. I'm not going to go super in-depth with these characters because we have a lot to cover, but the important thing is that I leave you with a couple of tips on how to handle that matchup. And if you feel like you have a better understanding of either Void or Death, or preferably both, please consider liking and subscribing to show a little bit of love and support. I would really appreciate that. Thank you once again for entering the chamber, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.